morning and welcome to this hour of Green Mountain Mornings here on 100.3 FM, AM 1490. I am your host, Olga Peters, and welcome back to the show, Wendy Levy from the comments.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad you could join me because it's been a while since we've had a chance to sit down and chat.
It's been a while. Yeah, I think the last time I was supposed to be here, I was out of town. I'm sorry.
You mean for having a life?
I know. Gosh, what was I thinking?
Journalists are not supposed to do that.
I know, right? We're not supposed to have time off. Huh. Yeah.
Right. So since you've been away,
Yeah.
and now you're back,
Here I am.
tell us a little bit what's happening at the Windham Solid Waste Management District around its solar array.
Oh, yeah. So I went up there, when was it? Oh, last week when it was still really hot out. And luckily the offices at the Windham Solid Waste Management District have a lot of air conditioning. Yay. So I was there to talk to Bob Spencer, the executive director of the district, about their solar array because it's been under construction. Well, they started doing the site work, I think in January. And so what happened is, so there was a landfill, the town's landfill was at, that end of Old Ferry Road there. And I think it's about 13 acres or so. And it's been capped. So it has a clay cap on it. And there's all kinds of regulations that it can't be disturbed. Don't disturb the cap.
They do all this water testing.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. And so, so a couple of companies got together and they built a solar array on it. And from what I've heard, it is possibly the largest solar array in Vermont.
I think that might be correct because I believe they actually had to get special legislation.
They did, Act 99. Yeah, that Peter Galbraith, when he was a senator in the legislature, he helped to craft that. You're right. And you know what? I didn't mention that in my story. I'm sorry. Thank you, Olga. Thank you for bringing that up. So, so it's a pretty big array. It has, I think, it's a net metered. So it's got, I think, 17 off-takers.
Wow.
Including the district. And Brattleboro is a big taker. So between the municipal buildings, like the town offices and such, and the high school, they're taking a pretty huge percentage of the power that it's going to put, or that it is putting out. And then other municipalities, their town offices and town garages, et cetera, are taking some, and then a bunch of different schools. And I believe the Brattleboro Retreat also.
Okay.
But all of its output is contracted.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's, it's all going into the grid and folks are getting net metered credits on their electric bill. And so they finished construction somewhat recently. Their certificate for public good, which is a sort of like a permit that the state issues for things like this, said that they had to have the array online, hooked up to the grid, putting power into the system by June 30th.
Oh.
They didn't quite make it.
Okay.
Which, the thing is up, it's running. At this point, it's probably online, but what they found out was when they tried to, hit the on switch, so to speak, there was some issues with some of the fuses in some of the transformers, at least according to Bob, because I mean, this is stuff I don't know about. I'm like, science, what, who, where? Anyway.
Switches, levers?
Yeah. So the company that made the transformer and Green Mountain Power folks were out, trying to figure it out. And they got it online for a little bit especially to satisfy the CPG. But according to a conversation I had with Bob more recently, sections of it are going to go online at a time as they're trying to figure this all out. But it's a pretty big deal for the high school, especially when I talked earlier this year to like a financial guy from, I think, the company who there's a bunch of different levels to it. There's like the company that owns the array, the company that had it built, hired these people, those people. So somebody I talked to who was a financial person talked to me about the numbers and told me that the high school, based on their previous electricity use, will be saving quite a bit of like tens of thousands of dollars a year on their electric bill by going with the net metered project.
Wow.
Yeah, so it'll be a good save, or it should be, I mean, at least if these figures are correct, it'll be a pretty good savings for places like schools and towns that could really use the help. The other financial winner here is the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District, because that land they still own. They're leasing it to the company that owns the solar array. So the district is getting $102,000 a year to lease out that property, and the district could use the money.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a municipally owned, sort of structure. So, each member town that belongs to the district, which is almost all the towns in Windham County, they have to pay an assessment for, the services that the district provides. And so this is really going to help that. And it'll help the district make some capital improvements. Like the district has a composting program, and folks who live in Brattleboro who have curbside pickup know this, because when Triple T collects your compost, they take it up to the district, and they have this, huge compost piles that have to get turned and such. And so the loader that turns those compost piles is pretty inadequate that the district owns. So Bob has had to hire out a company to come in and turn it. Well, now he can buy a loader using this, this rent revenue coming for the from the solar array, and save the district some money.
Well, fantastic. And that's also helpful. Wendy and I have to go to break, but before we go, I just wanted to check. It's helpful also for the district because the recycling market has changed as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They're not getting as much money from that, correct?
Yeah, except there's the district doesn't have a materials recovery facility anymore. So
that's right.
So it's not as it doesn't have as huge of a financial impact on them, but any revenue source, is really helpful because the district sells that compost.
Right.
And according to Bob, last year, compost sales were twice what they were the year before. So it's catching on. And, this new piece of equipment that they are able to purchase will help them, maintain that robust program.
Wendy Levy, thank you so much. Wendy and I will continue our conversation after the break. Welcome back. This is Green Mountain Mornings here on 100.3 FM, AM 1490. I'm your host, Olga Peters, and welcome Wendy Levy from the comments.
Thank you, Olga. It's nice to see you.
It's always fun to see you. We get to chat.
I know. Well, most of it's off the air, and
really can't be, said again
off
elsewhere.
the record.
with polite society.
Yeah.
There is some big news in town that might not seem big.
Not yet.
But I think it is.
I think it is too. I think it is.
The Winter's Farmers Market's moving.
Yeah. So I had a conversation recently with Sherry Marr, who's the market manager, and with Janice Baldwin, who's on the steering committee of the market. And this is not the same as the Brattleboro area farmers market. I want to be really clear about that. The one that happens during the warmer months over in West Brattleboro on Saturday. This is a totally separate institution. It's a function of Post Oil Solutions. It's its own independent entity. So this is the market that happens during the cold weather, and for the last 12 years has happened at the River Garden on Saturdays. Well, come November, it will no longer be in the River Garden. They are moving. They are moving to the church building on Flat Street,
right?
Where there's a dentist office there. Sam's has some storage there. So they're moving there in November, and to me that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Because it had been at the River Garden for 12 years, and it's a place where in the winter time, in the fall and winter and very, very early spring, you can actually buy things directly from farmers. Or I should say, more importantly, it's a place for local farmers to sell their wares in those cold winter months when there's really not, I think the Greater Falls Farmers Market in Bellows Falls does a winter one, but I think they may only do it once a month.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a big deal. And they knew that they've needed to move for a couple years. So Strolling of the Heifers bought the River Garden a handful of years ago and started making some changes that made it difficult for the the farmers market to continue operating there. I mean, one of the issues has nothing to do with who owns the river garden. It's a matter of space.
Right, because they've been expanding, and that's actually kind of good news.
Yeah, I mean, more vendors have wanted to sign up, but that it's not a huge space, especially
this is true.
especially because the winter farmers market likes to have a cafe section there. So there's people who are selling prepared foods that they've made locally, and you need place for the cafe tables because nobody's going to sit outside in February. So, there wasn't room to grow. But then the footprint shrunk because if you remember a couple years ago, Strolling of the Heifers opened up the basement, which used to just be like raw storage. And they turned it into some offices and a usable space. Well, they had to put in a good stairway and also a lift to make it accessible. And so that meant that upstairs, places where there used to be vendors was now like the railing and the lift. So that took space away from the vendors. And, that was a development that had to happen, but it still made it harder because I think they had to lose a couple vendors for the farmers market.
Okay, interesting.
And the farmers market also lost their storage space.
Oh, when they opened up the basement.
When they opened up the basement.
Oh,
And
interesting.
they could have gotten storage space, but they would have had to pay extra for it. And, this is a, the farmers market is meant to make, have a good place for farmers to sell their wares. Asking them to pay more money, really could put a hardship on agricultural people who are already struggling kind of to make ends meet. And then the River Garden raised the rent as they shrunk the footprint. And so a couple years ago, they had a huge community meeting to try to find a space, and it took them a while. They looked at, I think they told me, 10, 20 different spaces.
Wow, okay.
They got a USDA like rural business development grant. They did a feasibility study. They hired a consultant, and they kind of narrowed it down to like 4 choices, including staying at the River Garden. What the feasibility study did was told them how big of a farmer's market the area could support.
Okay.
And at that meeting that they called, with all those people there, John Hatton, who's a local real estate agent, was there and hooked them up with Janet Wallstein, who owns the church building. And she was there too, just as an interested community member. She made them a great deal on the rent and worked really closely with them. Sherry and Janice are really happy. They think that it's a really generous offer. And so now it's going to be easier for the vendors. They don't have to break their displays down every week. And there's a lot of parking. It's fully accessible. And there's more space for them. So it's going to be a win-win.
Looking forward to it. Can't wait till November when it opens up.
I know. I think it's going to be really lovely.
Wendy and I are going to go to commercial break. We shall return momentarily. Don't touch that dial. Hello and welcome back. This is Green Mountain Mornings on 100.3 FM, AM 1490. I am your host, Olga Peters, and my guest is the famous Wendy Levy from the Commons.
No, I'm famous.
I just totally gave you an upgrade.
Wow, I even get an upgrade. This is pretty swell.
See, it just who knows what happens when you come to the radio station.
I just have to show up, yeah.
So, Wendy, we were talking off air and you wanted to circle back to something you talked about earlier in the show.
Yeah.
And that's the farmers market.
Right. So I had mentioned earlier that the winter farmers market is moving to Flat Street in November to the church building. Well, it's kind of funny because that neighborhood is kind of becoming like almost year-round farmer market central.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, the Brattleboro Area Farmers Market Organization, the one that does the Saturday summertime market out in West Brattleboro, they started a downtown market. Actually, no, this has been going on for quite a while. It's moved a couple times. But a couple of years ago, they started doing a Tuesday evening downtown market on Flat Street in this basically like empty parking lot right next to the Boys and Girls Club. It was Tuesday from 4 to 7.
Right.
And so this year they moved it over to the New England Youth Theater because they have that really nice lawn out front.
Yeah.
And they set up a huge tent, like basically a circus tent, which I guess is kind of appropriate for a youth theater. And so there's all kinds of free parking. It's right there. It's right downtown, so people can walk to it. And I think it's pretty cool. And they have different vendors there. They even have a station where you can get your bike repaired.
Sweet.
Yeah, which I think is pretty rad. And so, it's one of those things where I think they've been having a hard time, like, sort of getting the word out about it. And so I wanted to give it a little plug, especially to connect it to the fact that the Winter Farmers Market is like literally next door. So I think that's going to be really helpful for people to start thinking of that neighborhood pretty much any time of the year as a farmer's market. And it's downtown, which is really excellent. So, for folks like elderly folks who live in the Sam Elliott apartment building, folks who live in the apartment building above the co-op, all the different people who live in that neighborhood, because that's some parts of that neighborhood are kind of a modest income neighborhood, and there's some elders who live there. This is a way for them to get fresh fruits and vegetables year round.
Yeah.
And that's pretty easy to walk to. So I think that's a nice development.
Well, it is. And it's actually formed kind of what they call those little business clusters, because you'll have the two farmers markets. You'll have Dottie's.
Right. Dottie's. Yeah.
And the co-op
Yeah.
kind of all right in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And experience goods.
Oh,
So if you forget your shopping bag, you can probably go and find one at the hospice shop. So yeah, I think it's really going to change that neighborhood, having that kind of activity going on there year round. People will think of it as a place like, oh yeah, I can go get some good fruits and vegetables that are grown, in Brattleboro and surrounding towns.
looking forward to that
Yeah.
little hopping area.
Yes.
Which brings us, we're talking a little bit about business clusters and neighborhoods. It brings us to the next town
Nice
over, Vernon.
segue.
Yeah, Vernon's village designation.
You're a radio star. So for those of you who've ever spent any time in Vernon, you may notice that there's no downtown. I mean,
Right.
there's no village center. Like when you think of like Newfane, right? Newfane
Yes.
has a very distinct village. Calling it a downtown might be pushing it a little bit, but there's definitely a village that has been established for quite a long time. Not so in Vernon,
Right.
but folks there want to have a village center.
Yeah,
So
they
they're
want that kind of community hub.
Yeah, where there could be, like a general store again, things like that. And so they're gonna create one. They're gonna make one in this town that has been, settled, colonized for, I don't know, a couple centuries. Like now we're gonna put a village. So a nonprofit group has been established called Friends of Vernon, and they're a registered nonprofit with the state. And then there's the Planning Commission, and then there's other town officials, and they've all gotten together and they applied for village center designation through the state, which allows them access to different grants and tax abatements, things like that for improvements. And so even though they don't have a village center, they got village center designation because they met the statutory criteria.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah, so that happened a couple months ago, and they got a grant because now with village center designation they can. So they got a $20,000 grant, and then the Friends and I think the Planning Commission from their budget put in a couple $1,000 more, and they recently hired it's a company called the SE Group. They're out of Burlington, and they're planning consultants. So they're taking the next steps to help develop this downtown area. And so the village center that they've chosen is where, what is it? It's Governor Hunt Road and Fort Bridgman Road, which is, what is that? It's 142, right?
so,
Is that the
yeah.
highway that goes through Vernon? So it's that kind of triangle there near where the town office, so the town offices are there, the elementary school.
Yep.
And Governor Hunt Road is the road that will take you by the nuclear power plant, and then the like the little park by the hydro dam there.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that. So that's Governor Hunt Road. So it's kind of that triangle there, and there's some houses there and some undeveloped land, and that's going to be Vernon's village.
That makes sense, because
Yeah.
we tend to think of our municipal and our school and our
Right.
library in the center of our villages. Yeah.
Right, and there was a store there, and a store has since opened. I haven't been in, I must admit, but I think they have ice cream there, so maybe now's a
We're
good time
going to have to take a trip.
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now what's happening is, the SE group is working with different groups of townspeople, other residents who are interested in what the development's going to look like, to find out like what do you want from this village center. And according to Martin Langeveld, who serves on the Planning Commission, and he's also a member of the Friends of Vernon nonprofit, he said that there's going to be what they call charrettes. Is that how you say it?
Charrette.
Charrette. Okay, it's a new term for me.
I totally understand though why you pronounced it charrettes, but yeah, it's charrette.
Charrette. Okay, so basically like small, public hearings, kind of, where residents can chime in on what they would like to see for this village center, because it belongs to the people of Vernon.
Yeah.
And they want to know what the people of Vernon want out of it. So I think it's really exciting, like let's see what happens with Vernon now that, a major change has happened to that town. Mm-hmm. Because the nuclear power plant, regardless of how you feel about nuclear power, and
right.
people can have whatever opinion they want on nuclear power, you still can't deny that that was a major economic force in
yes.
that town. And now it's not. And so what does that mean for a town? Did that come through the mic?
I think it did.
That was a funny sound.
That was a fun little sound.
That was like a happy little sound.
It was a little bit like a fairy blessing with her magic wand sound.
Yes, it was blessing Vernon. Now, Vernon, you get to figure out what you want to do with your future. So anyway,
their future is bright.
Yes, it absolutely is. So that's something that, I was happy to report on, that's moving ahead, that they got that grant money and they were able to hire the planning consultants. And so that's a story I'm going to be following because, when, other than like, what was it, in Florida, that town called Celebration that Disney created, you know about that place?
Mm-hmm.
When do we get to see in this century a new village get developed?
That's a really good point.
That's an unusual thing. We don't see that very often. We could see suburban sprawl.
Mm-hmm.
That's no fun.
No.
But to watch a village get created from scratch, essentially, I think is kind of a neat thing. So I'm looking forward to covering that, or to continuing to cover that, I should say.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a really good point with the power plant being closed. I mean, yes, it was an economic driver, and yes, you can have whatever opinion you want about nuclear power. It was also, in many ways, the de facto hub of the town. So it was kind of holding that place as a village center, even if it wasn't a true
It's not like you
center.
it's not like people would just go, visit it for no reason.
Right.
You don't go to the nuke plant to pick up like a quart of milk.
No.
God forbid.
No. But it was like a social place where people had their friendships and their community and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And that was another thing that was kind of
Yeah,
lost
that's
when
true.
the
Right,
plant
because if you were an employee there, you had that social engagement that most of us have when we go to work. Mm-hmm. And so, how do people gather? There's not really a gathering space.
Yeah. I'm really excited to watch Vernon because I think, it's so often we know that story of towns that it's the story of New England. All the mills closed and the town, what happens to the town?
Yeah, look at like North Adams, etc. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to watch Vernon because I think some folks have really grabbed the helm and be like, no, this is our town and it will thrive and it will survive no matter what life throws at us.
Right. Just because, this big corporation has decided to leave, it doesn't render our town moribund.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's hard. That's hard in a post-industrial economy. Mm-hmm. So, I'm curious and excited to see what Vernon does. They have some people who are involved in the Friends and the Planning Commission who have a lot of really good ideas and a lot of really good energy and aren't kind of stuck in this is how we've always done this, so we should keep doing it this
Good
way.
point.
And I think that's refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, coming up in another conversation you and I are going to have, we're going to touch on some other village centers.
Yeah.
But before we go, remind me quickly, I think the last time you were here, you talked about a solar project in Guilford that the CPG might have to change.
Yeah.
What's happening with that?
Yeah. So there's a solar array that's on, it's off Kirchheimer Drive, which is like you could kind of see it from Guilford Center Road, and then if you make that turn onto Tater Lane, it's on that parcel that's kind of like
Yeah.
on that
Yep.
corner, but it's back. You can't like you could kind of see it from the road, but not really. Anyway, Sovereign Solar built that on land that they leased from a landowner there. And when they filed their CPG, their certificate for public good, they had the solar array on one part of this field, but they got a complaint or a request, I should say, from a neighbor who said, "Hey, can you move it a little bit because I can see it, too much from my property." Okay, so they moved it a little bit. Well, they never amended their CPG.
Okay.
And the Public Utilities Commission said, basically, like, you have to file a new CPG. And Sovereign said that they didn't realize that they had to because, it's basically the same array, just in a slightly different place on the field. But, the Public Utilities Commission was like, no.
No, you still need
No,
to do
you
it.
still need to do that. And there's been some controversy because some of the other abutting neighbors said that they were never notified
Right.
about during the initial comment period for that CPG that was issued a little over 2 years ago. And so Sovereign did get fined. They got fined $5,000 for it. Yeah. And they claimed that they did send those notices out and they didn't come back returned. But, they sent them first class mail. Who knows? But it's kind of weird that to me, it's odd that two abutters never got their
Yeah.
mail. I know sometimes things get lost, but
For two.
yeah. So like, how did that happen? That's really strange. Anyway, there's been some controversy about it and some discussions at the select board meetings because the abutters want the select board as an interested party who can comment on the CPG to comment negatively because the abutting landowners who've made these complaints say that the new location of the solar array interferes with their enjoyment of their property, and they say that it's interfering with wildlife, etc. So it's been a little bit of a kerfuffle, but basically there is a possibility, and I'm not going to say how much because I don't know, but anytime you file a CPG, you might not get it.
Right.
And if the Public Utilities Commission gets comments to the effect that this doesn't serve the public good, if they lose their CPG, they may have to dismantle the thing. And I'm not I'm not a public utility commissioner. I don't know, but the possibility exists.
Right.
So I think the deadline for Sovereign for filing their CPG is this week or next week. So I'll be keeping an eye on it to see what happens, to see what the commission thinks, and to see if they get to retain their CPG in the new location.
Well, thank you for that, Wendy.
Sure.
And always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.